As you rightly mentioned, I'm used to this type of things. I would have been on the other side, preparing for these meetings, preparing for meeting the delegation with our own messages to the delegation, but also listening a little bit to the different countries on what are their needs, their policy orientation, and how we can help them moving forward. Now that I'm actually in the other side, I don't think I have a particular message other than paying a little bit more attention for donors in general, especially the World Bank and the IMF, to what I would call the institutional capacity of developing countries in general, conflict countries in particular, and the transition countries even in particular, because this is sort of unique moment in their history where institutions look like weakened by the different actually social, political movements, and this is where they need really particular attention and support. Why I'm here? Actually, this is a very good opportunity, usually the annual meetings, where you see a little bit of how economic policy moving forward, what are the changes, what are the global, I would say, concerns, how these big institutions are thinking going forward to address this type of cross-sectoral or cross-thematic issues. Usually there is something new, or at least something that call for a little bit more reflection when we go back home. Actually, we came in a very, I would say, tense, very particular moment of the transition, where after this tumultuous transition, this turmoil, etc., the national dialogue comes to agree on a roadmap that actually handed to this independent government to, in a way, run or to guide this action toward the final steps of the transition. So the first thing we really had to start the implementation of that roadmap. If you recall, the roadmap was clear in that regard. One is to complete the elections, or to prepare for the right environment, provide the right resources, and get sort of very peaceful democratic presidential and elections, so that we end the transition and we start a new era of democratic regime and more stable, in a more stable environment for a longer period. Especially Tunisia didn't leave that type of stability for the last 4 years after more than 50 years of stability. So it's something that is really new for the people. The second objective is really to make sure that security is restored, and we will have a sort of safe environment for the people, but also for investors and for the economy to start the recovery process. And the third was really to get the economy moving, and that is the most important thing, because the social demand increased since the revolution, and I think what I would call the fiscal reserves of the countries were kind of exhausted by giving up to the different social demands during the transition, and hence the difficult fiscal situation we found ourselves in. The growth actually declined, and the demands are kept going forward. That because of the weaknesses in the institution, the political instability, but the weakness of the political party, they couldn't resist actually the union and the increasing social demand, and hence you have a sort of very serious economic difficulties that we faced. What did we do? First, we did a very quick analysis and where do we stand on these three issues? What are the the priority action for each of these three main objectives? And we started working. At the same time, we realized that actually meeting the short-term needs of the countries will probably help, but will not put the country on a sustainable growth path or on a sustainable security system and so on. So we started also rethinking the way we started, but also think on what the country should do in the medium and long term. And at the same time, we kind of build the team, get to know each other, because we came from the different corners of the world, with different culture, with different way of doing things. And that also, I think it was very useful for us to become very quickly a team that can work together, coordinate very quickly, and start addressing the issues. We can come to this issue in a more detailed manner, but I think we succeeded in a number of areas. We have not yet probably succeeded in other areas, but what we did is already something that it's worth mentioning. Are we happy with what we have done? Probably given the environment, given the difficulties we found the country in, I think we can say that we achieved a lot, but still the country has a long, long way to go in terms of addressing the social and the economic and social issues, but in terms also of addressing building the democratic institution that will be the second phase. But what we did, clearly this is a serious issue for most of the countries. And if we look at the reasons behind this high level of unemployment, actually before the revolution, the level of unemployment was around 12%, which was already high. Now, after the revolution, we went up to 19%. Then it went down to around 16% now. It is extremely high. For young graduate, as rightly mentioned, actually this is around 34%. So it's too high, especially for young people. What did we do and what we are doing and we intend to do, because this is not something that we can resolve overnight. One is we started looking at why actually we failed. What happened to the economic growth model that we had to fail in creating the number of jobs that we need for the different categories of people, especially for the young graduates. And from there, we started putting some short-term type of policies, like one addressing the fiscal issues and trying to restore the macro stability so that we give a little bit more, I would say, hope and create the environment that needs, especially the monetary policy and so on and so forth, to get the private sector start and investing and creating the jobs that we need. But this is not enough, because when you have the security issues we have, plus the political instability and the lack of visibility until we have the election, so actually the resumption of private investment was not as high as we would expect it or we would like it to be. So what we started also looking at the public sector, not by providing more jobs in the public sector, which is already saturated, but we start actually looking what type of public investment that would in a way create the right infrastructure, create the environment that we need, and have actually the private sector moving along with the public sector. We started also actually looking at the number of public investment that have been started. We have more than 1,600 public actually investment projects. More than half of them were stopped for a number of reasons. So we started actually relaunching all these projects, and all of them would actually create jobs for the private sector in particular, where you have these contractors started working, so they have to hire, but you have also the indirect effect, where you have actually the inputs that needed for different civil workers and equipment and so forth, that gave a little bit of kind of movement and motion to the private sector. And the third thing, actually, we created what we call a sort of active labor policies that we put in place. Some funds, the microcredit, we put more than 100 million, the equivalent of $100 in place. And we started working with civil society and a number of other actually initiatives to create jobs for young people and so on and so forth. On the other side, we started a serious partnership to build a strong dialogue with the private sector and incite them to start investing without waiting for the election to be completed and to see how the political landscape will look like. Anyway, at the same time, we worked on the new economic strategy that we finished. Most of it is about structure and fiscal reform that the country needs to do. The country needed actually to do this years ago, but now we need to do it in a sort of more consistent way. And it gave actually place to the economic forum that happened in 8th of September in Tunisia. It was a major success. And I think we laid now the ground for what the country needs to do in terms of reforms, short, medium, and long term, so that we have a sustainable growth, hopefully 6–8%, and why not more. This is actually a very sensitive type of issue in the country, and everybody focused on the gap, the development gap between the inland region and the coastal region. And as you rightly mentioned, we need to do something about it, because if you look at the social and economic indicator between the inland regions and the coastal, there is a big difference. Now, in the preparation of our new economic strategy, we look at this issue, but in depth. And the reality is that it's not about public investment in the inland region, because they had their fair share, if not more. It's not about actually what type of public investment we need to do there, but we have to actually address the issue why private investment didn't go to the inland actually regions. And because if you look at the numbers, the real difference, the big difference between these two part of the countries is actually resides in the level of private investment, which was much higher, 3-4 times what happened in the coastal compared to what happened in the inland. Now, how do you explain this? And that's the most important thing. And the policy side actually will come from that, the right explanation that you can. When we dig a little bit down, you found a few things. One, the decision-making process is highly centralized. And that is where you need to come. So if you are an investor and you go to inland, you are not going to have actually the type of support institutional. They are not going to resolve your regulatory issues. You are not going to have your piece of land in a sort of zone, industrial zone or whatever, etc. You have to go back to Tunis, to the central level. For the slightest thing, it's so highly centralized that the first thing that we started doing, by the way, that the new government should do is really to, I would not say to decentralize, but to delegate, to devolve the decision-making process at the regional and the local level until such time we have the new decentralization policy as it's stated in the new constitution. The second thing is really to build the human capacity and the technical and economic skills of the staff of the regional institution. They don't have it. These are bureaucrats, employees, administrative people. But you don't find the right engineers, the good economists, the good financial guys, etc., the lawyers and the legal system that you need to actually, in a way, promote private investment in this region. That's capital, the human capital, the capacity of, and the skills of those who are running public institutions at the regional, the local level, should be provided very quickly and built. And the third thing, which is extremely important, is to start selecting the type of infrastructure project, not what actually the last 3 years the government that preceded us have been doing. They dumped on this region hundred of public investments for nothing because one, they are atomized, small, they have no effect. Second, they couldn't be implemented because the capacity, the execution and implementation capacity of regional institutions is so weak they didn't implement that much. So now you need really to be much more selective. You prioritize, you select those infrastructure projects that will make a difference. And there are many of them, and we started really region by region identifying what needs to be done that will make it a sort of, that will make a difference, that will make it also more attractive for the private sector to be. And third, you have to have a real dedicated, focused private investment reforms, so private policy reforms that would actually attract a private investment. And here you have to look at the business environment at the local level. You look at the bureaucracies and the different procedures and so on that you can simplify or kill them altogether. And you start also putting some technical support to accompany investors who want to invest in this inland region. That's how I see things happening at the region. And that's what the new government should, if they really would like to address the inland problems. The issue of the priorities, it depends on who is actually, which angle you take. I wouldn't take the political angle because I think this has dominated the discourse and the debate over the last 4 years during the transition by saying Tunisia will be the only case of the Arab Spring which may succeed, and hence we need to support it. And I think we all agree on this. There is no more case to make. And I think it's very important when we see the geopolitics of the region and what's happening in Iraq, in Syria, on a number of other countries. I think it's a sort of a moral obligation of all of us to help any nascent democracy that actually calls for peace, for tolerance, for human rights, for freedom, etc. And that's really, for me, a moral obligation. So any country that really, or any nation that would like to help and become part of the history of these nascent democracies should do it. So it's not only about Tunisia because it's the case today, so let's help Tunisia. But tomorrow it may be in other countries, and we need to do it if we want to have a peaceful world. Now, I take the economic angle, and that's where I see the United States playing a major role in helping Tunisia. And if I take the issue that you raised, employment, growth, I mean, 2 digits or around 8%. All of this will not happen without, on one side, the country leading the major structural reform that we need to do. There is no way we can grow and actually create the jobs if we don't do them. And that's now, I think, there is a conviction in the country that we need to do them. But this is not going to happen by itself if you do reforms, if they don't actually bring the type of private investment that we need, because only private investment create the jobs that we need and the quality of jobs that we need and promote that growth. So the United States, the first thing is, in my view, if they, in a way, encourage their investors, especially big companies, to come and support and invest in Tunisia, that will be the major and the most important things. And why Tunisia is a good case for investment for them, even if it's a little bit free. One is we have the whole African actually market, which is there. Tunisians have a good base, industrial base, that we can build in it. And it has a very good human capital, good skills, good labor force in terms of competitivity and in terms of productivity. So actually investing in democracy is also investing in economics that will support the consolidation of this democracy. So we have both actually benefits, but at the same time, investors who will do this type of investment of Tunisia, not only they will help democracy, but also they will help themselves by having a larger business actually area, which is Africa on one side, but also Europe. Our main partner today in Tunisia is Europe. Europe is open for we have good actually trade agreements with Europe, and it's open for whatever we do in Tunisia, provided that we are competitive, and that's clear for everybody. So in Tunisia, I think we look at the different sector in the new economic strategy that we developed, and we identified where Tunisia has competitive advantage in a number of areas like aeronautics, like actually the information and communication technology, the whole actually knowledge-based economy because of the human capital and the investment we have been doing in education. So there are areas where Tunisia has already comparative advantage, can actually increase its competitive edge, which actually American investors or American companies can use to have more market and to broaden their business. The second thing, in my humble view, is to help in a way Tunisia on the security area by working on a regional and the geopolitics. So we will be part of it, but that's also another area where the simple, I would say, support of democracy, but publicly stated, where the support for security and the safety of the region, and in particular Tunisia, given the different risks and threats that we are facing, and everybody actually is facing, that also will kind of give more comfort to investors to come to Tunisia, because the risk in terms of security or in terms of political instability, etc., will be minimized, and hence the return for their investor, for their investments will be higher. And third, I think it's very important, is to help in a way a reform structure and bring the good practice in the education system of Tunisia. These are the three areas. There are certainly more, many more areas, but definitely creating the right business environment, investing with these big companies to take actually the advantage of the market that we have out there, and of course security and the education system by bringing the good practice and the good quality of people. The takeaways. The first takeaway is actually the type of feedback that we got from those who participated. Some of actually, they came from all over the places in the world. That was a major success. That's the first time you have a sort of comprehensive economic strategy that touched not as usually countries would put asking for money to invest here and there. It was about what we as a country should do in terms of reforms. And we put the reforms the first priority for the country. So we are not asking countries to help us. Actually, we are asking ourselves to do what we should do so that countries can help us. So we reversed the approach. And the feedback we got from the different participants is that they were extremely happy to see that we took that responsibility on ourselves, and we understood that we need to do reforms, and we laid out what are the reforms and how we will be doing them and why we think that we will succeed. That is the first takeaway. The participants liked it. They liked it very much. Some of the countries said, sometime maybe you can come and help us a little bit in designing some of the reforms that we need to do. The second thing is actually there is a strong support for Tunisia. And that strong support for Tunisia will in a way hinge on or materialize when actually we succeed in our political transition, but also when we start the reforms. So the takeaway is, again, it's our responsibility to take it on ourselves and start initiate the reforms. This is what we did. We have already initiated a number of reforms in different sectors and different areas. So the takeaway, if you wish, is keep on taking responsibility, taking your fate in your hands, and do whatever you can do. We can help you and support you. So it is not the support that will help us. We help ourselves so that they can come and support us. So it's different. So, and it's very important. The third takeaway, actually, the Tunisian society got a little bit mixed, because this is the first time you tell people you are the problem, but you are also the solution. And the solution is make it clear for yourselves what is exactly that you want. You cannot blame the private sector, but also you call for the private sector to invest and create jobs. You have to be clear whether the private sector is a partner, and if it's a partner, then create the environment so that your partner can invest and create the jobs, but don't keep blaming your partner. The second, if the state has to play a role, you have also to be clear on what role the state should play. And actually, I had a number of debates with different scholars, intellectuals, civil society, and people, etc. And this is where I realized that it was mixed in their minds. And for the first time, it's clear that now we need to be clear on what is the role of the state, what is the role of the private sector, how can we make them work hand in hand, actually to spur growth, to create the jobs, to create the prosperity, and actually to create the jobs that people would need. And I think it's extremely important. And I think the last takeaway is extremely important for those who think about some of the remarks that were made by the participants. Actually is, what is the political economy that you will be addressing to make the reforms that you engage or that you committed to do? And that's where we are. So how do you manage the rapport de force between the different actors, and what type of participation, how actually you can bring support from the different actors, be it the unions, civil society, and so on and so forth, so that they support the reform that you need to do, and convince them that the sacrifice that they will be making in the short run will be extremely useful and will have high economic and social returns in the medium to long term. That's the last takeaway, which is not easy to manage, but we are convinced that we will be able to do it.